Anyway, email, right? This one came in from Jason White. Fellas, are the 49ers proving the late Dr. Eager right about punting on the offensive line? Despite having an offensive line ranked 25th in salary cap, 28th in pass protection, the 49ers have one of the most efficient and productive passing games in the NFL. Do you have an explanation for how this is working? Cheers, Jason. So remember, this was a thing that we brought up a while ago. Late Dr. Eric Eager is really powering the show at this point. He essentially made this argument that teams are better off dedicating not a lot of resources in the offensive line, focusing on run blocking rather than pass protection, and then running a scheme that works and putting all the resources into coach, receivers, scheme, not the offensive line.
I think my answer to this would be, I don't agree with that take from Eric. I think I've said that recently. I think Eric and a lot of the other analytics folks on the Twitter sphere are really hooked on, and you're going to hear this. If you're in our little Twitter circle, here's what you're going to hear all throughout draft season. All about sack avoidance, right? Sacks for a QB stat, most important thing. That's like their new kick. Most important thing is avoiding sacks, which I agree is like a very important thing. It's a very stable thing, and it's a projectable thing, right? Sam Howell wasn't great at it in college. He's not great in the NFL. Are you looking at the chat? Some funny stuff in the chat. Mm-hmm. Somebody said I've been eating pans of Thanksgiving leftovers for 12 days.
Yeah, multiple people were fascinated by your Frankenstein pan of Thanksgiving food.
That's how you do it.
That's how you do it individually. You.
It's a cookie sheet. The Black Friday game is, for now, it's the cookie sheet game. You throw all your food on the cookie sheet, you heat it up, and boom, eaten. 3 o'clock, Black Friday. So I disagree with Eric's take. So I think you're going to hear a lot about just sack avoidance, right? I'm just getting you ready, right? When people are evaluating Caleb Williams and Drake May and Michael Penix, there are going to be people who just list how well do they avoid sacks. This is like just ranking quarterbacks off that. That's like the hot topic right now. And then the theory behind that is, well, it doesn't matter. Your pass blocking is going to be dependent on the quarterback anyway, so you don't need good pass protectors. So I don't think that's what's happening in San Francisco. I think what's happening is what I've said throughout the years is that every team needs to understand their schematic advantage. If you have a schematic advantage, you could take advantage of that in team building. So the things we've highlighted in the past are if you have Aaron Donald, you can have edge rushers come and go and maybe have 10 sack seasons. And it's not because of the edge rusher, it's because of the interior pressure that Donald creates. If you're the Ravens, yeah, Jadeveon Clowney's having a great year, but the Ravens were this aggressive, blitz-heavy defense that would create 8 to 10 sack seasons for their edge defenders and let them walk and keep picking up comp picks when it wasn't the player doing it, it was the scheme and the way they play. Those things exist. I think Kyle Shanahan's offense is they can have production without great PFF grading, right? I think they've found that the way they run the ball, the way they exploit space, the way they get their guys into space, they can overcome bad run blocking. The play calling, the storytelling that happens within the run blocking. So I think this is more of a Kyle Shanahan thing and Niners schematic offense than a league-wide trend that you should neglect pass protection, look at run blocking. I think the Niners can just overcome it. And also, I think Brock Purdy deserves credit for being able to do this, because I think if Jimmy Garoppolo, they have not been this bad from a pass blocking standpoint with Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think he would handle this very well. I think you do give Brock Purdy credit.
But I think it is relevant specifically to this offense. I mean, the top 3 quarterbacks in the NFL in yards per attempt all run the same offense. Like, all those guys were in the same room 2 years ago. It's Brock Purdy, and he's at like 9.4 or something crazy. Then it's Tua, 8.9, I think, and then CJ Stroud at 8.4, right? And those guys are all half a yard clear of any other quarterback in the NFL, running the same system with their coaches, the relevant play callers, literally in the same room 2 years ago this time. So I think those guys, and you can see the effect, each individual one is having, none of those offensive lines are great, right? On paper, heading into the year, you're looking at that Houston offensive line, you're like, could be a rough one. Meanwhile, like, San Francisco is running the worst line they've had in years. Doesn't make any difference because Purdy's great, because the scheme is great, because the receivers are great. PFF, Bobby, and CJ Stroud have transformed that offensive line into not a problem. So when Titus Howard goes down hurt with an ACL for the year, you're like, yeah, it's a blow, but It's probably not derailing anything, right? Miami, you're like, that offensive line still isn't any good on paper, and yet it's playing like one of the better offensive lines in the league because the scheme is so great. I think specifically for that offense, it's probably a thing. Like, don't put any resource into your offensive line. You don't need to.
And that might be their schematic advantage.
Right.
So
for other teams, though, probably doesn't hold.
So the Niners have had, early Kyle Shanahan had Trent Brown at tackle and got a career year out of Trent Brown and let him walk and go to New England and get paid. And Trent Brown's been a good player since then. It wasn't like it was just a Kyle Shanahan thing, but you kind of like resurrected a guy's career, right? Mike McGlinchey, they let him walk in the offseason, and the offense hasn't missed a beat with Colton McKivitz there. And Colton McKivitz, again, doesn't look like he's not as good as Mike McGlinchey. He's just not.
Right.
But they're fine without him. But
also McGlinchey looks a lot worse now that he's removed from the cloistered environment of the 49ers offense.
He does. And so to me, I think it's – so I wouldn't use the Niners as this great example. The other one I would bring up, though, is like the Bengals. It still could come back to bite the Niners once you play the Eagles this week. Once you play Dallas again. If Dallas could ever figure it out against the Niners, it could come back to bite in the playoffs. The Bengals made the Super Bowl with one of the worst pass blocking lines in the NFL because they had receivers who got open quickly and Joe Burrow back there who could handle pressure and make big plays. But it did catch up at one point. It caught up in the Super Bowl, but you could still have a lot of success behind a bad pass blocking offensive line if you have receivers who get open. And I think to your point on the scheme, not only do the Niners and Shanahan and his people have open receivers better than everybody, they've got good blitz answers, right? So that mitigates pass blocking. So to me, it goes back to the scheme rather than a league-wide trend. The one other thing I'll say is if you go back 6 or 7 years and you say, okay, Dak Prescott had immediate success and Carson Wentz had some pretty quick success in his first 2 years, it was the opposite, right? I mean, you can't, like, they had great pass blocking offensive lines and they had a real estate in the pocket to move around, where we see, I mean, Bryce Young is sitting here behind a terrible offensive line and can't do anything. Daniel Jones is, when he's playing behind a terrible offensive line, now Tommy DeVito can do it, but Daniel Jones can't. His whole development was, trash because of the offensive line here. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's identified a connection between scheme and offensive line that is not, I don't think you can then use that connection to make sweeping generality saying this means that you should eschew offensive line in favor of X, Y, and Z because it's not applicable to every scheme. This means if you go and hire Bobby as your head coach next year, and that's the scheme you're running, maybe you don't need to invest in the offensive line as heavily as if you hired somebody else, right? But it doesn't mean that every team should start sacking off the offensive line investment in favor of other things.
One last thing. Eric has done good work through the years, and some of the people he's worked with, trying to quantify schemes. And if you've ever seen any of the graphics he's put up, it's like, who are the most diverse schemes in the NFL?
Right.
And there's 25 teams clustered in the middle. And then there's like the Shanahans have their corner, the Ravens have their corner, and then there's like one team that just doesn't do anything good. They don't motion, they don't run play action, they're just in their own corner. That's what's interesting to me, right? So even though I believe PFF grades are the best evaluation of what's happening on the field, the proper way to use them would be, are there certain styles of play that can mitigate bad grades? Or, as we've said with the Steelers, where guys can grade well, like Kenny Pickett can put up good grades and have bad stats, right? Those are stories that need to be told. And I think that's what we're doing with the Shanahan scheme and disciples. We're saying they can mitigate poor offensive line grading because they're so good at everything else. And maybe you don't need to worry about the grades as much with those schemes. But that's because they're on the outlier. They're outliers schematically, which is rare in the NFL because most people are pretty homogenous.
All right, quick question from the Discord question of the week. You can find the link to the Discord in the description of the show. Come join, come hang out. This one's from Philip. How do you grade throws quarterbacks make that could be turnovers but require a historic, never been done before in history type of play from defenders for that to happen? I.e., Mahomes routinely spikes the ball. If Jalen Carter actually managed to intercept that pass, is it a turnover-worthy play?
No, it would not be. It's almost like, yeah, you certainly wouldn't call it a turnover-worthy play. A turnover-worthy play is something where you can visibly see a bad decision or poor accuracy or something that we know is historically happens that puts the ball in harm's way. There are a lot of 0 graded or neutral graded interceptions. An example of that is, receiver runs a curl, cornerback jumps and tips it, right? Breaks it up. That pass historically falls incomplete 97% of the time. It's a pass breakup. It's a 0 grade. It didn't beat the coverage. The defender makes a great play. He tips it. He's not in between the receiver and the QB. He tips it. Where that tip goes is just out of the QB's control. And if it goes up and the safety makes a diving one-handed interception, it's still a neutral grade for the quarterback. If it falls incomplete, it's the same neutral grade for the quarterback. So we look at the actual throw and the circumstances around it, and if a defender makes a great play, he gets the credit for that. Again, even though the EPA is bad for the quarterback.
Yeah, the whole grading system is effectively about expectations, right? Expected plays based off, an average random person an average random player in that situation, not an average random person. So the expected outcome of a spike is an incomplete pass that stops the clock.
Right.
The expected outcome is not Jalen Carter makes the play of the century, dives through the center's legs and intercepts it. You can't, because that is like one of the greatest plays in NFL history, it is not a reasonable expectation for the quarterback to stop that happening, right? So if it does happen, the fact that that was completely not within the realm of expectation means that he doesn't get charged as a thing that he should have anticipated, right? It's not that every play that could possibly end up intercepted in any way, shape, or form is a turnover-worthy play. It is the plays that should reasonably be expected to end up in turnovers because they're thrown at a defender or they are so dangerous that there's a pretty good chance that gets picked off, et cetera.
Yep.